वेरी गुड इवनिंग टू ऑल। दिस साइड रूबी आहूजा और हम लोग आज डिस्कस करने जा रहे हैं गोल्ड मार्केट के बारे में। डिस्कस करेंगे उससे पहले एक बार अपनी पोजीशन जो है अपनी बाय साइड क्लियर करेंगे। बाय साइड हम लोग पोजीशन बनाने जा रहे हैं एशियन मार्केट के ओपनिंग का टाइम, और हम लोगों ने अपने एक पोजीशन को बाय बनाया हुआ है इस लेवल पे। देख सकते हैं हम लोगों ने अपनी अपनी एक पोजीशन बनाई 1777.98 के लेवल्स पे बाय साइड की। उम्मीद करें अपसाइड मूवमेंट दिखाते हुए मिले 1782 तक के लेवल्स हमारे उम्मीद पे। सेवनटीन 76.8463 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए पूरी तरीके से करेक्शन के साथ। सबसे पहले हम लोग अपनी इस पोजीशन को क्लियर करेंगे जो कि हम लोग की कल की ली हुई थी। इसको हम लोग क्लियर कर रहे हैं। और हमारी बाकी पोजीशंस जो हैं बाई की हुई 1777.98, 1777.84 और 1779.06 के लेवल्स पे। उम्मीद करें एक अपसाइड स्पाइक आते हुए दिखेगा और हमारी सारी पोजीशंस प्रॉफिट में कन्वर्ट होती हुई दिखेगी। प्राइसेस पूरी तरीके से करेक्शन के साथ 1774 के लेवल्स पे। पूरी उम्मीद अभी भी हमारे एक अपसाइड मूवमेंट की। 1 मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखते हैं तो 1 मिनट कैंडल थोड़े से अपसाइड मूव दिखाती है। अब एक शॉर्ट ग्रीन कैंडल के साथ मूवमेंट दिखाती हुई। हाँ, 1776.3233 के लेवल्स पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार अपसाइड स्पाइक मारते हुए 1782 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए दिखे मार्केट। एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन हम लोग उम्मीद करें कि ये 7 बजे की मार्केट है हमारी एशियन मार्केट, एक बार अपसाइड स्पाइक देती हुई $5-6 अपसाइड मूव करती हुई दिखे। 15 मिनट कैंडल देखे तो स्लाइट अपसाइड मूव 1776.5657 के लेवल्स पे। उम्मीद करें जल्दी अपसाइड स्पाइक लाते हुए दिखे और मार्केट 1780 के लेवल्स को क्रॉस करते हुए अपसाइड जाती हुई दिखे। सेवनटीन 77.1617 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार अपसाइड स्पाइक की इस कैंडल से कि प्राइसेस पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड राइज करते हुए दिखे और हमारी पोजीशन बहुत अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स में कन्वर्ट होती हुई दिखे। थोड़े से अपसाइड रेस 1777.6872 के लेवल्स। उम्मीद करें मार्केट एक बार अपसाइड रिबाउंड करती हुई 1782 तक के टारगेट्स दिखाते हुए मिले। ऑलरेडी मार्केट करेक्ट कर चुकी है और हम लोग उम्मीद करें एशियन मार्केट में एक बार हम लोग को वापस से तेजी आती हुई दिखे और 82 तक के लेवल्स मार्केट दिखाती हुई मिले। वन मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखते हैं तो 1 मिनट कैंडल थोड़े से अपसाइड मूव के बाद वापस से थोड़े करेक्शन। पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बुलिश कैंडल की जो कि पूरी तरीके से 1782-83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले। सेवनटीन 77.8283 के लेवल्स पे प्राइजेस मूवमेंट के साथ पूरी उम्मीद करें एक अपसाइड स्पाइक और प्राइजेस अच्छे खासे अपसाइड डायरेक्शन में आते हुए दिखे। एशियन सेशन में हम लोग एक अच्छी खासी स्पाइक की उम्मीद कर रहे हैं। बुल ग्रीन कैंडल जो कि 1783 तक के लेवल्स दिखाती हुई मिले। फिफ्टीन मिनट कैंडल की बात कर लो तो 15 मिनट कैंडल एक ग्रीन कैंडल फॉर्मेशन के साथ पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार 1782-83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले ताकि हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन क्लियर करते हुए दिखें। फिलहाल हम लोग अपनी 2 पोजीशन पार्शियल प्रॉफिट में बुक कर लेते हैं और ये रही हमारी दूसरी पोजीशन जो कि हम लोग पार्शियल प्रॉफिट्स के साथ यहाँ पे बुक कर रहे हैं। अब हमारे पास सिर्फ एक पोजीशन है जो कि प्रॉफिट साइड क्लियर करनी है। वेट करेंगे इस कैंडल के पूरे फॉर्मेशन का। पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार अपसाइड मार्केट स्पाइक लेती 1782-83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले। पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बुलिश स्पाइक की। थोड़े से अपसाइड मूवमेंट 1779.2324 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूवमेंट के साथ। सेवनटीन 80 तक के टारगेट्स हम लोग पूरी उम्मीद करें 80 के लेवल्स जल्दी ब्रेक होते हुए दिखे और 82-83 तक के लेवल्स मार्केट बनाती हुई दिखे। हमारी भी पोजीशन प्रॉफिट में थोड़ा सा वेट करेंगे और उसको क्लियर करते हुए बनेंगे। सेवनटीन 80 के लेवल्स पे मार्केट स्टेबल होती हुई जैसे ही ब्रेक करती हुई दिखेगी हम लोग को तुरंत 82-83 तक के लेवल्स देखने को मिलेंगे और वहीं से हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर करते हुए बनेंगे। सेवनटीन 81 तक के लेवल्स हमारा टारगेट 1783 के लेवल्स है। 15 मिनट कैंडल पूरी तरीके से बुल साइड, और 80 के लेवल से वापस एक बार करेक्शन दिखाते हुए एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन। पूरी उम्मीद करें अपसाइड राइज करते हुए 83 के लेवल्स बनाते हुए दिखे। फिफ्टीन मिनट कैंडल शॉर्ट रेड शॉर्ट ग्रीन कैंडल बनती हुई वापस से थोड़े से करेक्शन के साथ 80 को लेवल को सस्टेन नहीं कर पाई है। पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार साइड स्पाइक मारती हुई दिखे। दो मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम। 1 मिनट कैंडल का मूव दिखे तो थोड़े से स्लाइड करेक्शन के साथ वापस से उम्मीद एक बार शॉर्ट ग्रीन कैंडल की। हम लोग उम्मीद करें एक बार रिट्रेस करके मार्केट अपसाइड स्पाइक मारते हुए 83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले। 2 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम। फिफ्टीन मिनट कैंडल एक शॉर्ट ग्रीन कैंडल फॉर्मेशन के साथ बनती हुई दिख रही है। 1780 के लेवल्स एक बार वापस से ट्रेस करती हुई पूरी उम्मीद करें इस बार 83 तक के लेवल्स बनाती हुई दिखे। 1783 हमारा टारगेट है जिस पे हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर करेंगे। एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 1779.8084 के लेवल्स पे पूरी उम्मीद करें बुलिश स्पाइक जो कि 1782-83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले। एक शॉर्ट ग्रेन कैंडल के फॉर्मेशन के साथ 1780 1779 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बार अपसाइड स्पाइक के साथ 1782 83 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिले और वहीं से हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन क्लियर करते हुए बनेंगे। वन मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखे तो वन मिनट कैंडल स्लाइड करेक्शन के साथ 1779.7578 के लेवल्स पे 15 मिनट कैंडल थोड़ी सी करेक्शन, वन मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखते हैं तो वन मिनट कैंडल शॉर्ट रेड कैंडल के बाद एक थोड़ी सी स्पाइक के साथ अपसाइड पूरी उम्मीद करें एक बुलिश सिग्नल दिखाती हुई बहुत अच्छी खासी तेजी दिखाते हुए मिले। वापस से करेक्शन दिखाती हुई मार्केट 1778.9798 के लेवल्स पे मूव करती हुई हम लोग पोजीशन को यहीं पे क्लियर करेंगे। वापस से मार्केट करेक्ट होती है, देख सकते हैं हम लोगों ने अपनी पोजीशन क्लियर कर लिया वो शॉर्ट टर्म प्रॉफिट के साथ, क्योंकि इसके बाद मार्केट का मूव हम लोग को अपसाइड उतना देखने को नहीं लग रहा है। हम लोगों ने आज बहुत सारी पोजीशंस क्लियर की हैं, जैसे कि फर्स्ट पोजीशन 1777.98 पे बाय, 1779.32 पे सेल करके 1768 $268 के प्रॉफिट। दूसरी पोजीशन में $608 के प्रॉफिट, जो कि कल की पोजीशन थी। तीसरी $200 के और चौथी $84 के प्रॉफिट पे। मार्केट का मूव स्लाइड होते हुए देखने को मिला है 1779 1780 के आसपास मूवमेंट के साथ। 1780 का रेजिस्टेंस अभी ब्रेक करने में थोड़ी सी मुश्किल मार्केट को। मार्केट पूरी तरीके से स्टेबल होती है 1779 1780 के लेवल्स पे। देख सकते हैं मार्केट करेक्शन के साथ। मार्केट एक बार बुलिश रेंज में 1780 के लेवल्स बनाती हुई देखने को मिल रही है। बुलिशनेस के साथ 1780.5570 के लेवल्स, पूरी तरीके से तेजी दिखाती हुई 1780.99, पूरी तरीके से मार्केट अपसाइड स्पाइक लेती हुई 1781.3237 के लेवल्स पे। थोड़ी सी तेजी दिखाने के बाद मार्केट वापस से थोड़ी सी करेक्शन की ओर 1779.5657 के लेवल्स पे, और हम लोग यहाँ से अपनी पोजीशन को शॉर्ट करेंगे। हम लोगों ने एक और पोजीशन ओपन की है जो कि 1779.62 पे शॉर्ट की। मार्केट वापस से 1780 के लेवल पे, वेट करेंगे 1 मिनट का। 1 मिनट बाद हमारी दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन का टाइम। देखते हैं नेक्स्ट कैंडल का फॉर्मेशन किस डायरेक्शन में होता है। वन मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखे तो 1 मिनट कैंडल स्लाइड करेक्शन के साथ 1780 के लेवल पे। एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 7:30 का टाइम 1779.6976 के लेवल्स पे। पूरी उम्मीद करें थोड़े से करेक्शन, ताकि हमारी पोजीशन अच्छे खासे प्रॉफिट्स में कन्वर्ट होती हुई दिखे। वन मिनट कैंडल का मूव देखे तो स्लाइड करेक्शन के बाद वापस से थोड़े से अपसाइड मूव करती हुई $1778.09, और हमारी पोजीशन $200 के प्रॉफिट में, और हम लोग यहाँ से भी पार्शियल प्रॉफिट कर लेंगे। ग्रेट, तो हम लोगों ने अपनी एक और पोजीशन क्लियर की है 1778 के लेवल्स पे शॉर्टिंग जो क्लियर की है हमने अभी। मार्केट करेक्ट करती हुई 1777.6362 के लेवल्स पे। तो हम लोग देखेंगे एक छोटी सी क्लिप गोल्ड न्यूज किटको की।
We're talking all things silver today with Steve Penny. He is the publisher of the Silver Chartist Report. Steve, welcome to the show.
You bet, David. Thank you so much. I've been following you guys for a long time. First time guest, but a long time listener. So it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you for being here. And I followed you on Twitter. You've got some amazing posts. And we'll be talking about some of your research today. Focusing on silver, I know you cover the uranium and gold markets as well, but today primarily we'll be talking about silver and your outlook for the metals. Silver has had a rough year, to say the least. A lot of people expected it to go higher for a variety of reasons. One of the interesting things I've noticed this year, well, myself and other analysts I've spoken to, is that silver has diverged from the gold price. Historically, they've moved in tandem. Silver has had a higher beta to gold, but this year, for some reason, if you look at the two variables next to each other, they don't seem to be moving in the same direction all the time. Why is that?
Well, I would not necessarily agree with that over the long term. You could certainly, that's certainly a true statement over the last few months. But if you look at the gold to silver ratio, something I track very closely, going back to March of 2020, that ratio had reached an extreme that's never been seen before, about 130 to 1. And then very quickly, that ratio compressed down to about 65 to 1 in August of last year. So that ratio had moved really far, really fast. So I think what we're seeing here is just kind of a little bit of a backing and filling in that ratio, where we sit, last I checked, somewhere around 75 to 1 or so. But I do think that silver will continue to move in the same direction as gold and outperform gold as the bull market resumes.
Okay, and let's talk about the gold-silver ratio now. So, as you said, historic levels, never before seen before. We've come back down since 120, 130. Historically, it's hovered around, I would say, 50. Now we're still higher than that. What's your outlook for the gold-silver ratio? Where should it be according to your analysis?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of answers to that. You can look at mining output, and roughly roughly a 9 to 1 ratio, where silver is pulled out of the ground roughly 9 times in greater abundance than gold. So that's one ratio you can look at. You can look at a long-term historical ratio, and that's roughly 15 to 1. And 15 to 1 is interesting to me because that's typically where bull markets peak. So back in 1980, at the peak of that bull run, the price of gold was roughly 15 times that of silver. So I think in the fullness of time, in the next few years, we're very likely to see that ratio revisited 15 to 1. Of course, that's going to take some time because we're sitting at roughly 75 to 1 now. But that would mean that silver outperforms gold by roughly a factor of 5 over the next few years. And I think that's a very logical path forward.
A decline of the gold-silver ratio down to 15 to 1 could imply one of two things. Either silver skyrockets to the moon or gold collapses. Which is more likely?
Well, I don't think gold is going to collapse. I think we've already seen most of the selling here. I'm not necessarily calling a bottom, but I think we're much closer to a bottom than a top in the metals. And like I said, I think silver is going to outperform going forward, but I also think gold will do very well.
Okay, and let's talk about the industrial component of silver. So let's circle back to the fundamentals now. What do you think are the core drivers right now?
Well, for the silver price, you mentioned industrial demand. That's a tailwind. Industrial uses for silver are only increasing, especially with electrical vehicles, solar panels, you name it. There's a lot of things, industrial uses for silver. But that's not my primary investment thesis, and that's the primary investment thesis is based on retail investment demand. If just a small number of general investors say, hey, I want to have exposure to just some silver, there's just not simply enough at today's prices. And historically, that's what drives, the kind of prices silver investors are looking for, north of $50. And
okay, so
I think it's that is coming. We're just waiting for a catalyst.
Well, silver investors might be wondering, we've had a number of industrial catalysts this year, the infrastructure bill, the long-term greenification of our economy that requires silver in a lot of different applications, industrial applications. So why hasn't the silver price moved this year?
Well, like I said, the industrial demand, that's a tailwind. But what we need to really see the price move is more generalist investors come in, retail demand. And we just haven't quite seen that yet. We do have the Wall Street silver crowd, and there's a constant bid for silver, physical silver. But we're not seeing the generalist investors shift en masse. They're still into what I call the bubble assets, general equities and things like that. But at some point, they're going to shift. Value investors are going to shift over towards silver, and that's when we're going to see the really explosive moves higher, in my opinion.
So, well, we did see the silver squeeze earlier this year from the Wall Street silver crowd.
Right.
That wasn't enough, you're saying?
Well, it was enough, but it's still a smaller subset of the general investment crowd. Like, you're not seeing silver talked about on Fox Business or CNBC or anything like that. People are going they're chasing momentum. And right now that's in stocks, tech stocks, and other assets. But at some point, that's going to shift. And one metric I like to track is the Dow gold ratio and the Dow to silver ratio. And we need to see the metals start to outperform stocks. And as that starts to happen, that's going to attract a lot of those generalist investors to take their chips off the table in these overvalued assets and cycle into things like silver and uranium and gold.
Okay. Isn't that kind of a chicken and an egg problem now, Steve? I mean, these mainstream media outlets that you mentioned, Fox Business, CNN, CNBC, they're not going to talk about silver or gold for that matter until the price moves. I remember mainstream coverage of gold. It hit a peak last summer when gold also, no pun intended, hit a peak.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like they were covering it before when there was no price action. So yes, we do need to see more mainstream adoption, but mainstream adoption is going to happen at these low volatility price environments. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. And it's important to know, especially with silver, the price is set by supply and demand of paper contracts set on the commodities exchange, or the COMEX. And historically, the commitment of traders report is a good indicator, not necessarily of nailing the bottom, but of when a bottom is close. And what's interesting is the commitment of traders report in silver has greatly improved over this last few weeks. So we're seeing the banks starting to cover their short positions, and we see smart money posturing for or positioning for the next turn in silver. And I think that's going to be a big catalyst too when the banks start buying.
Why do the banks have short positions to begin with?
Well, that's a really good question. If you ask them, they'll say it's to hedge existing longs and for their clients. But I'm not one of these people who blames every downtick on manipulation. But I think there's a very good case to be made that silver is likely the most manipulated metal on the planet.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? How is it being manipulated?
Well, on the COMEX, you can see that large sell orders come through at very illiquid times, and that's not the price. That's not the behavior of traders who would be looking to maximize profits.
Okay, so can you elaborate on that? They're doing what exactly?
So let's see. I'm trying to think of the most recent example. Like I said, I don't blame every downtick on manipulation.
I understand.
And I didn't intend to open up a can of worms, but if you go back, let's see, a few weeks ago, there was a really sharp sell-off in gold, something like $80, $90. I can't remember the exact date. And that happened at a very illiquid trading time. In the middle of the night before the New York traders are active. If you're a trader looking to get rid of your long positions, that's not how you would get rid of those. You would want to sell gradually into strength or into more liquid markets. That's just one example of how banks can potentially manipulate the paper price lower.
Well, Steve, I mean, that just speaks to the illiquidity of the silver market and the paper contracts and the COMEX altogether. I mean, isn't that the same argument as saying, well, a penny stock is being moved dramatically by, one seller selling a bunch of lots
Right.
overnight. But I mean, he may or may not necessarily be manipulating the market. He's just dumping his positions, right? But it's an illiquid market for that penny stock, and so therefore it's moved a lot.
Well, if let's use that analogy. Let's say you owned a penny stock, you wanted to sell it, and it trades on very thin volume. I mean, are you going to try and sell that in off-market hours when there's no buyers there? No, you're going to scale out slowly in the most liquid hours. You're not just going to dump it all at once because you're not going to get the best price. And I think that's a great analogy for what we see in the silver market frequently.
Okay, so let's go back to the price now. So the price action we've seen over the last couple of months has been has been, if I can characterize it as being stale, that could I would use that word. But I'd like to get your opinion on how it's performed thus far, according to your expectations as a silver analyst.
Yeah, and saying stale, I think that's putting it kindly. Let's just say it's been terrible. It's been just flat out ugly. I mean, if you told me back in August of 2020 that we'd be here in September of 2021 with a 21 handle in silver, most people wouldn't believe you. Almost everything is going up except for, silver and the things that should be going up in this environment. So it's extremely frustrating. And I sympathize with that. But, I'm a contrarian investor. And as a contrarian investor, I like this price action because it gives us time to accumulate. It gives our members a time to accumulate at much more favorable prices. And, if history is any guide, this is not going to last. Silver and gold have a long track record of thriving and prospering in this exact environment that we're seeing right now. Sure, there are still some short-term headwinds as the Fed continues to talk about taper, normalization of interest rates in 2022. Those are short-term headwinds, but from a longer, bigger term or macro perspective, we know that's not sustainable. Silver and gold always do a full accounting for the expansion of debt-based fiat currency, and I don't think this time will be any different.
If I were new to the market, if I were not yet invested in silver, would you recommend me getting in right now, or do you think I should wait?
Oh, absolutely. I love that question, David, because a lot of people maybe learn about the silver space for the first time and their eyes are open. They realize that, stock market's a bubble, or they come to these conclusions and then they sell everything and pile all in. And I don't think that's a wise move. I think everyone needs to have a plan. And first of all, I think people should decide, hey, I'm new to this space. How much of my portfolio do I want to even allocate to this sector? That's the first question. And then from there, have a plan to accumulate. There's no right or wrong answer, but you could dollar cost average. You could simply wait for a technical reversal. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you could scale in on weakness. But having a plan is the most important thing. But I certainly wouldn't just, hey, I'm new to the sector, put all my money in right now. I don't think that's the wisest way to do it.
And so if I were to invest in silver right now, let's say, what are some of the instruments I could use? What would you recommend me do? Buy physical, buy the paper markets, buy ETFs? Sure.
Yeah, I love that question. So I'm a big advocate for owning physical metal stored outside of the banking system first. I like to say, build your moat before your castle. I think of physical metals as my defense, and then the mining stocks as my offense. And there's different ways to invest in the mining sector. Some are a little bit more high risk, high reward, if you know what you're doing or you have some guidance. But a simple way to do is just to buy the ETF. That's for someone who doesn't want to do any due diligence on individual stocks. There's some okay ETFs out there, but a well-selected basket of individual mining stocks would outperform, in my opinion.
Okay, interesting. And again, if I were a generalist investor who has no experience in the silver market, I may say to you, Steve, I've just taken a look at the long-term chart of silver over the last 40 years or so, and it has not even breached its 1980 peaks yet. So, I mean, this long-term chart, I'm a long-term investor, I'll say to you, Steve, and this long-term chart doesn't really look appealing to me. What's going to be different this time? What's going to be different in this next 40-year cycle?
Yeah, so the person who says that this doesn't look appealing to me, as a contrarian, this does look appealing to me. You just made a really good point. Silver still hasn't even surpassed its 1980 high. And I think that's the only commodity on planet Earth that you can say that about. Silver reached about $50 in 1980, and here we are at 21. So not only are we not above that 1980 high, we're less than half. So, I mean, unless this is some kind of anomaly where this time is different, silver's got much more upside and very little downside compared to any other asset that I can think of.
Okay. Now let's talk about this $50 silver price. I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario now. Okay. I'm going to say to you, Steve, we're talking about catalysts now. I'll say to you, Steve, next year, silver needs to go to $50. What would you say the catalyst has to be for $50 to happen in 1 year's time? So basically double in a year.
Okay. Well, picking catalysts is tough because there's a million potential catalysts out there and trying to nail it down to one. But here's one scenario that I think is likely. I try and avoid terms like using words like crash and collapse and things like that. But let's just say the stock market, I think, is due for a 20% pullback. A lot of people might call that a crash. I think if we saw a 20% pullback in the stock market, especially if it happened in a short period of time, that's going to get rid of any taper talk. They're going to stop talking about tightening interest rates over the in 2022, and they would probably reverse course and have more monetary stimulus. Just a 20% pullback in stock market. That could be a significant catalyst for the metals. So that's one potential scenario I'm looking at here over the intermediate term.
What's the relationship between monetary stimulus and the price of the metals?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially silver. Silver responds, has a direct correlation to Fed monetary policy. Easy Fed monetary policy typically results in uptrending prices for the metals. It's as simple as that.
Can you explain why? I mean, what's the connection here? So you've got a bunch of you've got the expansion of the money supply by the central banks. You've got presumably also a lowering of the interest rates because they need to lower interest rates. That's the mechanism with which they purchase bonds through the open markets. And so you've got more money supply, lower interest rates. How does that feed into higher silver prices?
Sure. So two answers to that. First, silver and gold, put simply, are money. They're money they've been money for thousands of years. And when currency is debased, people look to preserve their purchasing power. And silver and gold have historically done that role. So when they're debasing the currency, that makes silver and gold an attractive alternative. And then second, you mentioned interest rates. A lot of people right now put their savings in the bank to earn an interest rate. Well, if the rate of inflation is higher than the interest you're getting by keeping your currency in a bank, well, you're losing purchasing power, which again makes silver and gold a more attractive alternative, especially to big investors.
Okay. I've heard an argument from another analyst talking about silver. Now, I'll just ask you to agree or disagree with this statement here. Now, he said that silver, like you said, used to be a form of money for many, many generations. Mm-hmm. It may no longer serve that purpose going forward because what silver has done in the past was it's basically provided smaller units of account for gold. Like if you wouldn't go to a baker and buy your bread with an ounce of gold with a small gold coin, but you might do that with silver coins, for example. So it was smaller units of account for gold. Now what we have gold blockchain. We have gold on. We have cryptos coming out based on gold. That has basically infinite divisibility, and so you can pay for your piece of bread using small fractions of that gold blockchain. And so the purpose of silver is no longer there in the future. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, you're about the fourth person to ask me that in the last handful of days, and I believe you're referring to Lobo Tigre. I actually had the pleasure to meet him in person this past weekend, and Lobo is someone I look up to a lot. He's an independent thinker, and I really respect his thoughts. I'm not willing to say I fully agree with that right now. I mean, the last several thousand years are filled with failed attempts to replace silver and gold as money, and nothing has been able to replace it yet. Now, could blockchain take some of the monetary use away from silver? That remains to be seen. But as far as the blockchain uses for gold, there's also plenty of blockchain applications coming to silver as well. So I think I'm not sure I'm willing to buy into that argument yet, though. I think it's a point worth considering. I respect Lobo's thoughts on that.
Let's close on your forecast for the silver price. So I gave you a hypothetical $50 scenario. Let's talk about your more realistic base case for where silver could end up by this year, the end of the year.
Okay, so realistic forecast for this year, I'm going to say $400. I'm just kidding. No, well, I like to say I deal in probabilities, not predictions. So I think we're very close to a bottom here. There still is some downside risk to potentially $18 or $19 silver. I'm not saying that's a probability, but it's a high enough probability that we should be mentally prepared for it. The big number to watch is $30. I think everyone knows that who's been watching the silver price for any length of time. Once we get above 30, I think we do get to $50 fairly quick, probably within a quarter or two, because there's not much resistance between $30 and $50 silver. So I'll say once we get through 30, I think 50 comes pretty quick. Probably not in 2021, but perhaps in the first half of 2022.
Yeah, I've heard that before. So you're basically giving a pretty tight range from now until the end of the year, which is fair. Do you think the probabilities are more highly weighted on the downside or the upside from here? We're at $22 today.
Yes. Yeah, I think downside risk is minimal relative to upside potential for anyone with a 1 to 3 year time horizon. Downside risk is minimal. If you've got a 1 to 3 year time horizon, I think we're squarely in the accumulation zone. Nailing the exact bottom is very difficult. I mean, very few, and nobody can do that consistently. But we can say, hey, we're getting close here. All the fundamentals, the technicals are all starting to line up that we're getting close to a bottom here. And I think this is a great time to start scaling in if you've got that risk tolerance and time horizon.
So more likely than not, we'll hover between the.
तो हम लोगों ने क्लिप देख ली है and now we are moving towards our MT4 टर्मिनल, तो MT4 टर्मिनल पे देख सकते हैं एक दूसरी कैंडल जो 745 पे ओपन हुई है 1778.2021 के लेवल्स पे मोमेंट दिखाते हुए फिलहाल। सेवनटीन 77.9192 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए थोड़े से करेक्शन के साथ। देख सकते हैं वापस से 1778 से स्लाइट अपसाइड मूव दिखाते हुए मार्केट। देख सकते हैं मार्केट एक बार वापस से स्पाइक लेती है 1779 1780 के लेवल्स पे मूवमेंट के साथ। लगातार मार्केट में आज जो मूव देखने को मिल रहा है वो स्टेबिलिटी का देखने को मिल रहा है। सेम लेवल्स पे मार्केट का मूवमेंट 1779.7980 के लेवल्स पे। हम लोग आज की पोजीशंस देखें तो टोटल $807 की प्रॉफिट के साथ हम लोग इस टाइम ट्रेड करते हुए देखने को मिल रहा है। इस टाइम जो मार्केट का मूव है बहुत ही अनप्रिडिक्टेबल है। वनडे कैंडल की अगर हम लोग बात करते हैं तो वनडे कैंडल पूरी तरीके से अपने मिड बैंड और अपर बैंड के बीच में मूव करती। पूरी उम्मीद कर रहे हैं कि 1800 के लेवल्स क्रॉस करते हुए अब दिवाली में सोना चमकते हुए देखने को मिले। फिलहाल 1780.3233 के लेवल्स पे मूवमेंट दिखाते हुए वापस से थोड़ा सा अपसाइड। आज की ओपनिंग 1768.61 पे देखने को मिली। हाई 1788.22 का बनाया। 1766.68 का लो बनाते हुए 1780.5253 के लेवल्स पे करंटली मूव करते हुए देखने को मिल रहे हैं। जिस तरीके से मार्केट का मूव है लग रहा है कि एक बार हम लोग को तेजी देखने को मिल सकती है। मार्केट वापस से 1781.0102 के लेवल्स पे। पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड 1782 तक के लेवल्स मार्केट के रेडार पे। बुल ग्रीन कैंडल फॉर्मेशन जिसके एक्सपेक्टेशंस बिल्कुल भी नहीं थी इस टाइम पीरियड पे। 8 बजे का टाइम और हमारी दूसरी कैंडल ओपनिंग का टाइम होते हुए एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 1782.2026 के लेवल्स पे पूरी तरीके से तेजी। मार्केट पूरी तरीके से तेजी के साथ 1783 के लेवल्स पे देख सकते हैं प्राइसेस 1783 के लेवल्स पे मूवमेंट के साथ। इस टाइम मार्केट में कोई भी न्यूज़ नहीं है जिसकी वजह से मार्केट में जो मूव होते हुए देख रहे हैं वो पूरी तरीके से वी कुड से कि ऑपरेटर बेस्ड है, और वी कुड आल्सो से कि हर ट्रेंड को फेल करते हुए देखने को मिल रहा है। देखेंगे थोड़ी देर प्राइसेस का मोमेंट।
The upcoming Future Blockchain Summit coverage is brought to you by Cook Finance, a revolution in DeFi asset management.
We're back with Clem Chambers of Investors Hub, very diversified, well-rounded investor. Welcome back, Clem.
I'm well-rounded because I'm eating too much.
Well, you're well-rounded because you're knowledgeable in many areas, but eating is never a bad thing, Clem. So now you and me both. Let's talk about your macro outlook first. You've got look. We talked several times in the last year, and you were bearish on stocks around the fall of last year, I would say, and then you switched to a more bullish stance. Right now, the S&P 500 seems to have waned in its momentum. People are wondering whether or not they should be buying the dip, or perhaps waiting for more of a pullback. What would you do?
Well, I think the interesting thing to look at is to go back to 2000 and see what happened after the dot-com crash, because the Fed then tried to pin the Dow in a sideways trend for years and years and years. Obviously, we had 9/11 and we had some, drawdowns and a crash. But basically, for years and years, the market would go back to a level and just trade sideways. That really was the long-term trend. And I think that's what the Fed will be aiming for now. Now it's a post-COVID environment. They've still got all sorts of problems. There's obviously there's issues with the supply chain. There's inflation. There's strange goings on in employment, and there's a lot of repair to be done. So rather than just keep pumping up asset prices, I think they'll try to pin them in a range around this area for quite some time. I think that will be the master plan, and there'll be buy the dip opportunities. There'll be things that no one's expecting that are bad that will happen, and therefore I think it's going to be going sideways from here with some dips, maybe even serious dips, depending on how people react to the taper that's coming.
You're saying the Fed wants to pin assets around a range. How are they doing that? How are they pinning assets?
Well, I mean, it's all right now. It's all about money flow, and when they pump money in, up it goes, and when they don't pump money in, down it goes. So they've got pretty simple levers to pull, and if they want to get clever, they just buy assets at different yield terms, and trade the curve of the bond yields, and that will regulate how much money is flowing in and flowing out. Because I think most people would say these days that long gone is free markets, and that the Fed is basically cornered the bond market and to an extent cornered the equity market too. So they are in control of asset prices, and it will take a lot to actually take that control away from them. And I'm pretty sure they've got a master plan, a plan of what's going to happen over the next few years, because it's going to take 3 or 4 or 5 years for what's happened with COVID to actually get out of the system, and be it inflation, be it all the disruption in the supply chains. Well, that's going to take a year or two to get out. The restocking of a lot of people, of a lot of parts of the economy, reason for a lot of this disruption is that there's been huge destocking in the last 2 years. So restocking, the repair of the supply chain, the removal of runaway inflation from the system, getting GDP back to a sustainable level, it's going to take years and years and years. And they will have a master plan for that. And it's not going to be assets going up vertically, and it's not going to be assets going down. So it'd be like 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's going to be generally sideways trading. And you can check the chart yourself after the dot-com crash, and you'll see, particularly in the Dow, there's a sideways trade. And, once you've bigged things up, you don't want them crashing back down again. You don't want them keep going up, because that's unsustainable. So you want a period of calm and sideways. And I think that's what they'll be aiming for. Whether they can sustain it or not is another matter. If you think that they can roughly sustain it, then it's a buy the dip environment. If you think they can't sustain it, then you're going to be looking to avoid a crash. If you think they're going to have to keep printing because of fiscal deficits, etc., well, then assets are going to go through the roof. Yeah. Personally, I think they'll hold it sideways.
I guess the short days of buying whatever stock you want because stocks only go up are gone. Are you saying?
I think that's right. Absolutely right. Because if you look at that period, stocks only rise. That's the period of SPACs. That's the period of biotechs exploding. That's the past, not today. Today, there's no SPACs. The meme stocks. I mean, what's amazing going on there, nothing special. That era has come to a close, and it's come to a close because the market bubbled, and the Fed has shut it down by talking taper, and they will undoubtedly taper somewhat, even though it's money coming into the market still. But that it's clear that pretty much everybody in government, one way or the other, is now pretty worried about inflation. The trouble is for them is that there's not much of a way of controlling it unless they do austerity. And they're not going to do that, are they now? So they're in a little bit of a corner when it comes to inflation. So we should expect 7-8% inflation for 2 or 3 years out, at least, I think. And that's one of the big things to factor into investment.
You mentioned that before to me. Now let's talk about particular assets that might be able to hedge against those levels of inflation, Clem. What about cryptocurrencies?
Well, crypto is very interesting because a lot of people think the reason gold's not going up is that Bitcoin is the fastest horse. So, if you want to get out of Dodge, you jump on the fastest horse, not the most reliable one. And that's the one that gets all the attention and all the money flows. I don't actually buy that at all. And crypto is very interesting, but it's also very high. And, is it going to be driven much higher from here? The main ones, Bitcoin and Ethereum, I doubt it. But I've been a bear, and for me, the market should be a lot lower. It's almost miraculous that it's where it's at, as far as I'm concerned. If you want to play in that market, and you know what you're doing, and you really should know what you're doing before you start gambling with crypto, the DeFi Ethereum tokens is the place to be, because that's where the pop is. So rather than going all in and then getting squashed, maybe with crypto going down 20%, you can go in a risk-off manner, i.e. smaller positions, and look to get much bigger pops in those smaller tokens. So, for example, one of the few that I've been holding is one called Rarible, because I expected to get listed on Coinbase. Well, it was listed last night, and up it went 50%. Well, you're not going to get an overnight rise in something like Bitcoin of 50%. Whereas a good token like Rarible, which is easy to understand, easy to study up on, easy to realize was going to go on Coinbase, offers that sort of opportunity. And there are others out there like that in the second tier, in the tokens that are worth hundreds of millions and low billions. So I think anybody who wants to play that game should have small position sizes and be looking for the next hot token or blockchain.
I want to talk about how to invest in the DeFi space, Ethereum in particular. Peter Lynch, one of the great investors, had a quote about timing. Well, he had several quotes, but one of them here, I'll just read this. Market timing is speculating and it rarely, if ever, pays off. Now, I want to get your take on whether or not that quote applies to cryptocurrencies, because you see volatile moves in the order of 25 to 30% on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. Is it important to wait for or try to time bottoms, try to time tops, and local bottoms, try to find the opportune time to get in? Or does it really not matter? Because if you're a long-term investor and if you're investing in the DeFi thesis, would it really matter if you're getting in now or, a couple $1,000 less per coin? I'm talking about Ethereum, for example.
Hired professionals will tell the not hired amateurs to give them their money, because there's no point market timing, because it can't be done. So us investment professionals should look after your money at great expense to you, and we'll do it all for you. So I can understand why market professionals say, you can't market time. And it is very difficult. But investing is not so difficult if you have a thesis, an idea. This is going to happen because of that. That's going to happen because of that. If you have those ideas and you think long and hard about them, you will have no problems market timing not to the second or to the day or to the week, but over the medium term. It's the short term that's very, very difficult. And market timing is very hard. It's a skill game. And therefore, you just can't run in and go, oh, that chart looks like it's going up, I'm going to buy that chart. Oh, it looks like it's going to go down, I think it's going to go down. As I said, if you think it's going to happen, it isn't. If you know it's going to happen, then you should think about playing. And, with crypto, the best way to invest in crypto is to play with it with small sums. So, you could get on one of the exchanges like a Binance. I know all our American viewers will probably get shot dead by the law enforcement if they dare think about that. But if they get an exchange and they start get their wallets and put a few dollars into Ethereum or Bitcoin and start swapping them on exchanges and start reading and just playing with it at very, very small numbers. So tens of dollars rather than tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Over a few months, they will get the idea and they'll find it easy to invest. But you can't do it by reading books. You've got to do it the Montessori way, learn by doing. And that's the best way to start in crypto. Just play with it for a few months and and the light bulb will go on and you'll get it and you'll be fine.
I'm going to go back to your analogy about Bitcoin being the fastest horse in the race. Even fast horse, even the thoroughbreds need to take a breather and rest every once in a while. Do you think it's in cryptocurrencies are in a rest period right now?
Well, I mean, I think they've done amazingly because they were definitely crashing and then something happened and they zoomed up again. And that was probably a mixture of China banning it. And so therefore lots of people in China had to buy into Bitcoin before it's too late. And lots of Afghan people running for the hills, or not Afghan hills, but, running out of Afghanistan loaded up with assets and putting them all into Bitcoin to get on that plane. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And, I think that turnaround, that was a real pivot. So now it's a question, is it going to break the all-time high? And I can certainly look at the chart and see it breaking its all-time high. But I'm a bear. I'm waiting for it to go under 20,000. And I think my horse is, actually is going to end up as pet food in the short to medium term. But that's not what the market's telling me. The market's telling me it could easily go through the all-time high, because that's what the market is saying. And like in the same way as I think gold is fantastic, the market is telling me it sucks. I don't understand why gold sucks. I mean, everywhere you look, there's inflation. And I mean, it's even more extreme with platinum, because this whole net carbon zero world relies on platinum catalysts. And, apparently in the next 10 years, well, before we're old men, or before I am anyway, there's going to be no internal combustion engine cars. It's all going to be running off batteries. And, and it's going to be a hydrogen world. And it all needs platinum. And where's platinum going? Exactly nowhere. Doesn't work in my head.
Well, just on that note, I don't think we're both going to be old men by the time that happens. A lot of the UK, where you're from, didn't they just ban the sale of combustion engines or cars with combustion engines after, I think, 2035 or 2030?
Yeah, 32 or 35. Yeah, something impossible to actually make happen. But isn't California banning, leaf blowers?
California has already done that. New York State has just, in the last month or so, made a similar ban. EV cars only after 2035 for all dealers within the state of New York. So,
that's only 8:30. That's halfway through the evening. I mean, that's ridiculous.
All right, so in our final segment, I'm going to give you a few themes and a link back to everything we've talked about. A few themes, trends that the world is heading towards. And then I'll just ask you to pick one or two assets to invest in accordance to those themes. So the first one would be the shift towards electric vehicles, like we just discussed. I mean, whether or not it's going to happen by a certain deadline in 14, 15 years, whatever that may be, that is the trend right now. How would you play it as an investor?
Exotic metals, rare earth metals in particular. Rare earth is going to be hot. Platinum group metals, because of the hydrogen economy, that's going to be a big thing. Really,